Beyond Israel's borders, Iran continues to stir turmoil in the Middle East. A radical rebel group funded by the Islamic regime fired a rocket at a U.S. and Israeli ally in the region during an official visit by Israel's president. The rebels are based in nearby Yemen, and they say they'll continue to attack the United Arab Emirates as long as it's friendly with Israel. But leaders from those two nations say they won't be deterred by Iranian-backed aggression. The UAE says it destroyed a ballistic missile site in Yemen after shooting down a missile fired at their country by an Iranian-backed rebel group. The attack came during the historic visit of Israeli President Isaac Herzog to the UAE capital Abu Dhabi after the two nations signed an historic peace agreement in 2020.
We are two successful nations who basically started with very little in our hands, developed our lands into a successful paradise, and this sends a message to the entire region that there is an alternative for peace and living together, and that the sons and daughters of Abraham can reside and dwell together in peaceful coexistence.
Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed thanked Herzog for Israel's support after the two recent missile attacks by the Houthi rebels.
It's a stance that demonstrates our common view of the threats to regional stability and peace, particularly those posed by militias and terrorist forces, as well as our shared understanding of the importance of taking a firm stance against them.
Dr. Najat Al-Sayed of the American University in Dubai said the timing of the visit demonstrates that the new relationships between Israel and its Arab neighbors will stand up to threats by Iran's proxies in the region.
We're going to support the warm peace, which is the main kind of peace that kills the hostile and extremist ideologies.
Israeli Reserve Brigadier General Yossi Kuperweiser said it also comes in the context of the U.S. pulling back in the region and developments with Iran.
Coming to the UAE in a time like that, when the fate of the Iranian nuclear project is going to be determined, is very important for Israel, and to show that we are there together with the United Arab Emirates facing this radical threat. It's very important strategically.
The U.S. State Department condemned the attack. Spokesman Ned Price tweeting, while Israel's president is visiting the UAE to build bridges and promote stability across the region, the Houthis continue to launch attacks that threaten civilians. Meanwhile, the rebels threaten more attacks.
The Yemenite armed forces confirmed that the UAE enemy state will remain unsafe as long as the tools of the Israeli enemy remain in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, launching aggression against our dear country.
In another sign of the growing military cooperation between Israel and its Abraham Accord partners, Israel's Defense Minister Benny Gantz paid an historic visit to Bahrain. Gantz met with Bahrain's king and also signed a memorandum of cooperation with Bahrain's Minister of Defense. The signing comes 1 year after the Abraham Accords, and Gantz says it will strengthen both countries in the face of emerging threats in the region. And as we said, one of those threats is the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. Their attacks on the UAE are a sign this group has emerged as a major player in the Middle East. For years, the Houthis have waged a guerrilla war to control the strategic country of Yemen. But now they've grown from small arms to long-range missiles.
The Houthis, backed by the Iranians, have really been put on steroids in terms of their abilities. This is a militia that was using AK-47s and RPGs back in those days. Now they're using drones and ballistic missiles that can go, 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers. So it's clear that the Iranian hand is basically using them as a proxy to terrorize, the region and potentially threaten Israel, the United States, all over this area.
Yemen sits at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. If they control Yemen, the Houthis will also control the strategic Mandab waterway, where a large amount of the world's oil passes. They also pose a serious threat to their Arab neighbors. The Houthi missiles traveled nearly 900 miles before hitting their targets in the UAE. This satellite image shows the damage. And after the attack, the Houthis boasted about attacking the American allies. And they sent a message to both Israel and the UAE by launching missiles during the historic visit by Israeli President Isaac Herzog. Seth Frantzman of the Middle East Center for Reporting and Analysis says this group has now become a major player in the region.
We are certainly entering a bit of a new era in terms of the fact that the Iranian-backed group in Yemen is now a big player and will look to become another type of Hezbollah. And that will have big ramifications for the United States, for Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf, and all these partners and potentially international trade.
Some fear it could be a dangerous turning point for the Middle East. Yet last year, the Biden administration took the Houthis off the list of foreign terrorist organizations, a move criticized by the UAE ambassador to the U.S.
And just for everyone's sort of transparency here, we are asking our friends in the administration and in Congress to reinstate the Houthi terrorist designation as an FTO. I think the case speaks for itself.
Some believe the Biden administration took the Houthis off the list to curry favor with Iran at the nuclear talks. But Frantzman says in the larger Middle East picture, the region faces two visions for the future.
One wants a Middle East that is taken over by a bunch of Iranian-style mafias that are impoverishing the region and spreading chaos and religious extremism. And the other one is a model that is, what you see when you go to Tel Aviv or Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Jerusalem. You see cities that are functioning and people that are able to go to school and university and improve the world. So I think it's basically two diametric, different types of visions.
Alpha.